The reason you are not yet where you want to be financially has almost nothing to do with your income. That is a bold claim. Let me defend it. Across every income level, in every country, on every continent, researchers, coaches, and financial historians have observed the same pattern again and again. People who receive sudden large sums of money, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, even professional athletes with multi-million-dollar contracts, frequently return to their original financial position within a few years. Not because of bad luck, not because of the economy, because the mind they brought to the money had not changed. Conversely, people who lose everything, bankruptcy survivors, immigrants who arrive with nothing, entrepreneurs who face catastrophic failure, frequently rebuild to extraordinary levels of wealth within a decade or less. Not because they found some magic strategy, because the mind they brought to the rebuilding was different. Money follows mindset, always, without exception. This book is about that mindset, specifically about the 12 mental patterns that keep brilliant, hardworking, deserving people trapped in financial struggle, and the 12 corresponding shifts that open the door to something completely different. This is not a book about budgeting. It is not a spreadsheet guide. It is not a list of investment products. Those tools matter, and once your mind is ready, you will be able to use them effectively, but tools in the wrong hands build nothing. This book is about getting your hands ready. Each chapter examines one specific mental shift, one way of thinking that separates people who build wealth from people who stay stuck. Each shift is grounded in real human stories, backed by the wisdom of some of the sharpest thinkers who ever lived, and illustrated through analogies drawn from everyday life that make abstract concepts land with concrete force. Read this book with a pen in your hand. Underline the sentences that feel like they are talking directly to you. Those are the ones that matter most. Your financial transformation begins not in your bank account. It begins in the next 12 chapters. Let us begin. Chapter 1, The Poverty Script. Henry Ford once said, "If you think you can do a thing or think you can't do a thing, you're right." There is a story told about a man named Joseph who grew up in a small village in rural Ghana. His family was not merely poor. They were the kind of poor that has been poor for so many generations that poverty stops feeling like a condition and starts feeling like an identity. "We are not rich people," his grandmother used to say, not with bitterness, but with the flat certainty of someone stating a geographical fact. "The river does not flow uphill." Joseph heard this sentence, or versions of it, thousands of times before he was 18 years old. He heard it in his grandmother's voice. He heard it in the resigned shrug of his father when an opportunity appeared and vanished. He heard it in the way his mother's eyes went quietly flat whenever anyone in the family dared to dream aloud. By the time Joseph was old enough to make real choices, he did not need anyone to say it anymore. The sentence had moved inside of him. It had become the lens through which he evaluated every opportunity, every risk, every possibility. Unconsciously, automatically, he found himself arriving at the same conclusion his grandmother had always arrived at. People like us do not do things like that. Joseph is not unusual. He is, in fact, the rule. Every human being alive today is running a financial script, a set of deeply embedded beliefs about money, wealth, and what is or is not possible for them specifically. That was written before they were old enough to think critically. This script was authored by the people around you in childhood, by the economic reality you witnessed before you had language to question it, by the messages of culture and religion and community that surrounded you before your conscious mind was formed enough to push back. The script is powerful not because it is loud, but because it is invisible. You do not experience your financial beliefs as beliefs. You experience them as reality. When you tell yourself, "I am terrible with money," or "wealth is for other kind of people," or "money always runs out before the month does," you are not reporting facts. You are narrating a script, but it feels exactly like facts. The neuroscience of the money script. Here's what happens in the brain when you hold a deeply embedded belief. It stops being processed as a thought and starts being processed as a sensory reality. The neural pathways associated with strongly held beliefs are, at a structural level, indistinguishable from the pathways associated with direct perception. Your brain does not distinguish between what is real and what has been thoroughly conditioned to expect. This is why you can show a person who believes they are bad with money an entirely viable opportunity, clear, low-risk, logical, and watch their nervous system reject it automatically. Not after consideration, before consideration. The rejection happens below the level of conscious thought, in the same neural architecture that pulls your hand away from a hot flame. The poverty script becomes, at a biological level, a reflex. The psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl observed this mechanism in one of its most extreme forms. He watched people in the concentration camps who had internalized the oppressor's definition of them so completely that they could no longer imagine their own freedom, even when freedom became physically possible. The chains, he observed, had moved from the wrists of mind, and the chains in the mind were, in many ways, the more powerful restraint. When we are no longer able to change a situation, Frankl wrote, we are challenged to change ourselves. The poverty script is a situation you can change. Not instantly, not without discomfort, but completely. The key is first to see it, to make visible what has been invisible, to hear the script playing as a script rather than experiencing it as reality. The three most common poverty scripts. Script 1, money is the root of all evil. This phrase, almost always misquoted from a much more nuanced original observation, has been used for centuries to make virtuous people feel that the pursuit of wealth is morally suspect. People running this script unconsciously repel money because accumulating it feels like a moral failure. They give away compulsively. They underprice their services. They feel guilty when they are financially successful. The script keeps them safe from the discomfort of becoming someone their community defines as morally compromised. Script 2, rich people are not like me. This is the script of inherited class identity. It positions wealth as belonging to a specific kind of person, a different education, a different family, a different starting point, a different skin, a different culture, and positions yourself firmly outside that category. Every time you encounter wealthy people, the script runs. They have something I do not have and never will. This script is extraordinarily effective at preventing action, because why would you work towards something that is structurally out of your category? Script 3, I am just not good with money. This is the script of learned financial helplessness. The belief that financial competence is an innate trait distributed randomly, and that you simply did not receive it. People running this script genuinely do not try to improve their financial habits because they have already concluded the effort is pointless. They avoid looking at their bank balances. They do not track their spending. They feel a kind of nauseated helplessness around financial decisions, not because they are incapable, but because they have been told and have believed that they are. The self-help author and entrepreneur Jim Rohn had a phrase for the process of recognizing and rewriting these scripts. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. He was pointing at something deeper than simple social influence. He was pointing at the fact that our beliefs about what is possible are constructed almost entirely from the evidence we are surrounded by. Surround yourself with poverty scripts, and the poverty script will feel like reality. Surround yourself with people who hold different beliefs about money and possibility, and reality itself begins to feel different. This is not magic. It is neuroscience. The brain is a pattern recognition and prediction machine. Feed it new patterns consistently, and it will begin to construct new predictions. Identify your own script. Take a moment right now, before you read another word, and complete these sentences without thinking, without editing, without reaching for the correct answer. Write the first thing that comes to mind. Money is rich people are. I am the kind of person who, in my family, we have always. The reason I don't have more money is. Your answers to these 5 prompts are your script. Read them. Sit with them. Not to judge yourself. They were written before you were old enough to choose them, but to see them clearly, perhaps for the first time, because you cannot rewrite a script you cannot see. The shift. From inherited narrative to chosen belief. Here is the mental shift at the heart of this chapter. Your current relationship with money is not a fact about you. It is a story about your past. And unlike facts, stories can be rewritten. The investor and author Robert Kiyosaki built an entire body of work around this insight. The single most powerful asset we all have, he wrote, is our mind. If it is trained well, it can create enormous wealth in what seems to be an instant. He was not speaking about intelligence or education. He was speaking about the quality of the beliefs and mental models you bring to financial reality. Rewriting the poverty script does not mean pretending your history did not happen. It means understanding that your history wrote one possible story, but not the only possible story. The river does not flow uphill in nature, but human beings are not rivers. They are something far more extraordinary, creatures who can choose the direction of their own current. Joseph, the man from Ghana whose grandmother's words lived inside him, eventually left his village and built a business. It took years. It required the painful work of identifying every version of the poverty script running in his mind and choosing, deliberately and repeatedly, a different thought. He told me, "I did not change my circumstances first and then change my thinking. I changed my thinking first, and then the circumstances had no choice but to follow." Your script is not your destiny. It is your starting point. And starting points, by definition, are where journeys begin. Chapter 2, The Employee Mind in a Wealthy World. Robert Kiyosaki said, "The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them." In the early 20th century, a brilliant industrialist named Andrew Carnegie was once asked by a young journalist named Napoleon Hill to explain the secret of his extraordinary wealth. Carnegie was, at that time, one of the richest men who had ever lived. He had built a steel empire, funded libraries across the world, and given away the equivalent of billions of dollars. He could have said anything. What Carnegie said was this: "I do not work for money. I set money to work for me." Hill spent the next 20 years interviewing the wealthiest people of his era and trying to understand what separated them from everyone else. The answer he kept encountering, in different forms from different voices, across different industries, was the same answer Carnegie had given him at the beginning. The wealthy did not think of themselves primarily as workers. They thought of themselves primarily as investors, investors of time, capital, energy, and ideas. This distinction between the worker's mind and the investor's mind is the second great mental shift that separates financial struggle from financial freedom. The brilliant trap, the employee mind, is not a stupid mind. Let me be very clear about this. The employee mind is often an extremely intelligent, disciplined, hardworking, talented mind. The trap it sits inside is brilliant precisely because it looks like success from the outside and feels like virtue from the inside. Here is how the trap works. You are told from childhood that the path to a good life runs through education, which leads to employment, which provides income, which provides security. Work hard, get paid, spend what you earn, save a little if you can. Repeat for 40 years. Retire if the math works out. This is not an evil plan. For most of human history, in most economic contexts, it represented the best available option for the majority of people. The problem is that it contains a structural flaw that becomes increasingly devastating in a world where information, automation, and global connectivity have permanently changed what is economically possible. The structural flaw is this: when you trade time for money, your income is permanently capped by the number of hours you can work. You are one person. You have 24 hours. Even at the highest hourly rates, you are fundamentally limited. And more importantly, when you stop working, the income stops too. You are, as a consequence, always one crisis: a health emergency, a layoff, an economic shock, away from financial catastrophe. The wealthy do not have this problem, not because they work harder, but because they have learned to build income streams that continue flowing while they sleep, while they rest, while they are sick, while they are doing something else entirely. They have learned to put money, ideas, systems, and other people's effort to work on their behalf. The fisherman and the fish farm here is an analogy that makes this distinction viscerally clear. Imagine two fishermen working on the same lake. The first fisherman, let us call him Emmanuel, is extraordinarily skilled. He is up before dawn every morning, out on the water with the best equipment, working harder and more efficiently than anyone else on the lake. He catches more fish than almost anyone. His income is the best of any fisherman in the village. But Emmanuel must fish every day. If he does not fish, he does not eat. His skill is extraordinary, but it is trapped in his body, his time, and his daily presence on the water. The second fisherman, let us call her Amina, is also skilled, but at some point, Amina made a different decision. Instead of fishing harder, she used some of her earnings to build fish traps, then nets, then a small fish farm. She trained two other fishermen to manage the operation. She wrote down her best techniques and taught them to others in exchange for a share of their catch. Today, Amina catches far fewer fish with her own hands than Emmanuel, but her total harvest dwarfs his. And when Amina is sick, when Amina is traveling, when Amina is sleeping, the fish traps and nets and farm and trained fishermen are still working. Her income does not require her presence. Emmanuel has an excellent job. Amina has a wealth system. Most people spend their entire lives becoming better Emmanuels. The mental shift in this chapter is learning to think like Amina. The 3 income streams framework. The investor's mind thinks about income in 3 categories that the employee mind rarely encounters. The first is active income, money that requires your direct, ongoing effort. Employment, freelancing, professional services. These are all forms of active income. There is nothing wrong with active income. It is, for most people, the starting point and provides a capital for everything else. The mistake is treating it as a destination. The second is portfolio income, money that comes from investments, interest, dividends, capital gains. Money put to work in financial instruments that generate returns without requiring your daily presence. The wealthy consistently reinvest a significant portion of their active income into building portfolio income. The financial educator Warren Buffett captured this principle with a characteristic simplicity. If you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die. The third is passive income, money that comes from systems and assets you have built or acquired, rental properties, businesses that operate without your daily management, intellectual property that generates royalties, digital products that sell continuously, affiliate relationships, licensing agreements. Passive income is the gold standard of financial independence because it requires the highest upfront investment of time and creativity, but eventually operates independently of your ongoing effort. The employee mind looks at passive income and thinks, that is for other kinds of people. The investor mind looks at active income and thinks, this is my starting capital. Funmilayo Shifunmilayo was a pharmacist in Abuja, Nigeria, earning a good salary, respected in her profession, doing genuinely important work. She was also, at 34 years old, realizing with growing unease that she had no financial safety net, no investments, and no income that would survive her next sick leave. Her shift began with a question her husband asked one evening. What happens to us if you can't work for 6 months? The question kept her awake that night, not with panic, but with a particular kind of uncomfortable clarity that comes when you see your situation honestly for the first time. She did not quit her job. She did not take a dramatic leap. Instead, she began learning. She began investing a small portion of her salary each month into index funds, not enough to feel like a windfall, but enough to establish the habit and the mindset. She began studying the rental property market in her city. She wrote an e-book about medication management for patients with chronic illness, something she knew extraordinarily well, and began selling it through a simple website. 3 years later, her active income from pharmacy was the same, but her portfolio income had grown to a meaningful supplement. Her rental property was generating monthly cash flow, and her e-book was selling steadily to a growing audience. She told me, I did not become wealthy overnight, but I stopped being one crisis away from disaster. That felt like freedom I had never known before. The shift from hourly thinking TO system, thinking the mental shift in this chapter is not about hating your job or dismissing the dignity of work. It is about expanding your financial identity beyond the worker. You are allowed to be excellent at your profession and simultaneously be building something that will eventually work for you. These are not competing goals. In fact, the skills, knowledge, and credibility you build through excellent work become the raw material from which you build your wealth systems. The question to carry from this chapter is simple. What am I building that will continue to generate value when I am not personally present? If the answer is nothing, the time to start building is now, not when you have more money, not when you have more time, now, with whatever you have. Because the greatest cost of the employee mind is not what it costs you today. It is what it costs you in compound time, the years and decades during which your money could have been working, growing, multiplying, while it sat idle waiting for you to give it permission. Chapter 3, The Urgency Illusion. Warren Buffett said, do not save what is left after spending, but spend what is left after saving. In the late 1960s, a Stanford psychologist named Walter Mischel conducted a series of experiments with young children. that became one of the most referenced studies in the history of behavioral economics. The setup was simple. A child sat alone in a room with a single marshmallow placed in front of them. The researcher explained that they were leaving the room, and if the child could wait until they returned without eating the marshmallow, the child would receive 2 marshmallows instead of 1. Then the researcher left. The results were fascinating. Some children ate the marshmallow almost immediately. Some waited a little, while then surrendered. A small number sat through the full waiting period and earned the second marshmallow. But here's the part that made the marshmallow test famous beyond psychology. When Mitchell followed these children into adulthood decades later, the children who had waited for the second marshmallow showed consistently better outcomes across almost every measure: educational achievement, financial stability, health, and social relationships. The capacity to delay gratification, demonstrated at age 4, predicted adult success with remarkable reliability. What Mitchell had discovered was not merely about willpower. He had identified one of the central battlegrounds of human financial life: the war between the present self and the future self. The present self versus the future self here is the uncomfortable truth about your brain. It does not treat your future self as fully real. Neuroscience research using functional brain imaging has shown that when people think about their future selves, the neural patterns are strikingly similar to the patterns activated when thinking about a stranger, not a close friend or family member, but someone you do not know well. This is why it is so easy to spend money today that your future self will desperately need. Your future self feels abstract, a theoretical person, not yet real, not yet present, whose suffering is easy to discount in favor of your present self's very immediate, very real desire for the new phone, the restaurant meal, the impulsive purchase that costs nothing right now because the credit card does not ask you to feel it until later. This is the urgency illusion, the feeling that the want of the present moment is urgent enough to justify compromising the security of the future. It is an illusion because most things that feel urgent in the moment of wanting look completely different a week later. The dinner at the expensive restaurant, the designer purchase, the upgraded device. These things often feel genuinely essential in the moment and largely irrelevant in retrospect. But the financial consequence of acting on illusion is entirely real and accumulates without mercy. The cola can that cost $30,000 here is an analogy that makes the compound cost of small impulsive spending visible. Imagine you buy a cold cola every afternoon during your work week. It costs about 500 naira. That feels like nothing, a small pleasure, a trivial amount, barely worth thinking about. But let us follow that 500 naira across time. 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. That is 125,000 naira per year on afternoon cola. Over 10 years, that is 1.25 million naira. Invested at a modest 10% annual return, that afternoon cola habit costs you, not in what you spent, but in what that money could become, over 2 million naira across 20 years. This is not an argument against ever enjoying a cold drink. It is a demonstration that the urgency illusion operates at every level of spending, from the most trivial to the most significant, and that its compound cost is almost always dramatically higher than it appears in the moment. The financier and philosopher Benjamin Franklin had a phrase for this: beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. Franklin lived in an era before modern financial instruments, before compounding interest was fully understood mathematically, but he understood at an intuitive level what behavioral economists now demonstrate rigorously. The small, impulsive, urgency-driven expenses are not small at all. They are the accumulated weight that keeps most people financially underwater for their entire lives. The 3 urgency traps. The urgency illusion operates through 3 specific traps that are worth naming individually. The first is the emotional purchase trap. You feel bad and buying something makes you feel better, temporarily. This is a physiologically real response. Retail therapy activates the same neural reward pathways as other forms of short-term pleasure. The trap is that the emotional relief is brief and the financial consequence is permanent. Shopping is not a coping strategy. It is a debt generation mechanism disguised as a coping strategy. The second is the social urgency trap. This is spending driven not by genuine need or even personal desire, but by the social pressure comparison and status signaling. You buy the more expensive car, not because it serves your transportation needs better, but because of what it communicates to your social circle. You attend the expensive event not because it brings you genuine joy, but because not attending would signal a financial inadequacy you are not willing to expose. This trap is particularly powerful because its driving force, the fear of social judgment, is one of the most primal human anxieties. The personal finance author Dave Ramsey captured this with a line that became a motto for a generation of debt recovery journeys. We buy things we don't need with money. We don't have to impress people we don't like. The third is the convenience trap. This is spending driven by the path of least resistance. Ordering takeout because cooking requires planning. Taking a taxi because a bus requires patience. Buying the pre-packaged thing because making it yourself requires time. Convenience is not intrinsically bad, but when convenience spending becomes a default rather than a deliberate choice, it generates a steady, invisible drain on resources that could be compounding toward freedom. Chitty's reckoning. Chitty was a marketing manager in Lagos, earning a salary that most people in his social circle would consider comfortable. He drove a nice car, wore good clothes, ate at decent restaurants, and had approximately zero savings. The reckoning came when his company announced redundancies, and Chitty realized, with a cold clarity that felt like stepping under a waterfall in Harmattan, that if he lost his job, he could not pay his rent for more than 6 weeks. 34 years old, 12 years of earning, and 6 weeks of runway. He did not lose his job, but the 6-week number stayed with him. He began tracking his spending for the first time in his life, not to judge himself, but simply to see. What he found stunned him. He was spending approximately 40% of his income on things he could not clearly remember when the month-end statement arrived. Small purchases, impulse buys, convenience spending, social appearances. The urgency illusion, multiplied across hundreds of individual moments, had quietly consumed nearly half of 12 years of earnings. Chitty made one rule change. For any non-essential purchase over a certain amount, he would wait 72 hours before buying it. If after 72 hours he still wanted it and could genuinely afford it, he would buy it without guilt. In practice, more than half of the things he had been about to buy urgently simply stopped mattering to him after 3 days. The urgency had been a feeling, not a fact. Within 18 months of that one rule change, Chitty had built his first meaningful emergency fund. The wallet had not changed. The salary had not changed. The mind had changed. The shift from present gratification to future wealth. The mental shift in this chapter is not about becoming a miser. Life is meant to be lived. Joy is worth spending on. Experiences and pleasures and celebrations are part of a fully human life. The shift is about becoming conscious, about replacing automatic, urgency-driven spending with deliberate, values-aligned spending. It is about the difference between spending that serves your future and spending that mortgages it. The South African entrepreneur and philosopher Strive Masiyiwa described his own financial discipline with characteristic directness. Sacrifice is not about going without. It is about choosing which version of your future you want. The version that ate the marshmallow immediately, or the version that waited and received more. 2 marshmallows. It has always been about 2 marshmallows. Chapter 4. The network is the net worth. Porter Gale said, "Your network is your net worth." In 1973, a sociologist named Mark Granovetter published a paper that would eventually become one of the most cited research articles in the history of social science. The paper was titled "The Strength of Weak Ties," and it made an argument that seemed, at first glance, counterintuitive. Granovetter had studied how people found jobs. Specifically, what social connections were most useful in opening doors to new opportunities. Common sense suggested the answer would be close friends and family, the people who knew you best and wanted to help you most. His findings revealed something completely different. The connections that most frequently led to significant opportunities were not the close friends. They were the acquaintances, people you knew casually, who moved in different social circles, who had access to different information and different networks than your own tight community did. Granovetter called these weak ties, and his research demonstrated that they were, paradoxically, enormously powerful. Not because weak ties care about you more, but because they connect you to worlds beyond your immediate environment. Your close friends tend to know what you know, have access to what you have access to, move in the same circles you move in. Your weak ties are bridges to entirely different landscapes. This research has profound implications for wealth building that most people never apply. The ecosystem of opportunity. Here's an analogy. A seed does not grow in isolation. It needs soil, water, sunlight, nutrients, and a microscopic ecosystem of bacteria and fungi that make the soil itself fertile. A seed planted in sterile, isolated ground, no matter how genetically excellent that seed might be, cannot reach its potential. But the same seed in a rich, diverse, connected ecosystem grows into something extraordinary. You are the seed. Your network is the ecosystem. Most people who struggle financially are not struggling because they lack talent, intelligence, or work ethic. They are struggling because their ecosystem is too small, too homogeneous, and too isolated from the places where opportunities circulate. They are excellent seeds planted in sterile ground. The wealthy, almost universally, across cultures and economic contexts, are embedded in rich, diverse, intentionally cultivated networks. They know people at different levels of economic achievement, in different industries, in different geographies, with different expertise and different access. These networks do not merely provide emotional support and social belonging. They provide the flow of opportunities, information, investment, and introduction that are the actual mechanisms through which wealth is generated and sustained. The business magnate Richard Branson built his extraordinary empire on the foundation of what he describes as a simple principle. Business opportunities are like buses. There's always another one coming. But he immediately qualified this. The question is whether you're at the right bus stop. Being at the right bus stop requires knowing where the right bus stops are, and that knowledge comes from your network. The cost of the small circle most people, by their mid-30s, have settled into a social world of remarkable similarity. Their friends have roughly similar incomes, similar occupations, similar life stages, similar perspectives. This is natural. Human beings are drawn to the familiar and the similar, but for wealth building, it is extremely limiting. Consider, if everyone in your immediate social circle is earning roughly the same as you, struggling with roughly the same financial challenges, and holding roughly the same beliefs about money, then your social environment is actively confirming and reinforcing your current financial position. You will rarely encounter a new idea about money that challenges your existing framework. You will rarely receive an introduction to an opportunity outside your current orbit. You will rarely be confronted with the practical reality of a different financial possibility. The philosopher Epictetus, himself born into slavery and who rose to the power of his mind to become one of the most respected thinkers of ancient Rome, observed, "The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best." He was not merely speaking about emotional uplift. He was pointing toward the real, practical effect of social environment on the development of the self. Building intentional connections, the mental shift here is from passive social accumulation, collecting the people who happen to be near you, to intentional network cultivation. This does not mean becoming coldly transactional in your relationships. It means becoming deliberate about exposing yourself to people whose experience, perspective, and access are different from and beyond your own. Practical strategies for intentional network building include attending industry events and conferences outside your immediate professional circle, joining communities organized around learning and growth rather than mere socializing, finding mentors who have achieved what you are working toward, and genuinely studying how they think, volunteering or contributing to organizations that attract people with different backgrounds, and, increasingly in the digital age, building meaningful online relationships with people across geographic and economic boundaries. The late Jim Rohn, whose influence on multiple generations of entrepreneurs and wealth builders is extraordinary, said, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." This is not merely a motivational observation. It is a quantitative prediction. Identify the 5 people you spend the most time with, average their income, their level of ambition, their financial habits, and their beliefs about what is possible, and you'll find your own approximate financial position. Want to change your financial position? Change your average. Adiz introduction. Adiz was a talented graphic designer in Port Harcourt, working for clients who could afford to pay her roughly the same amount she had always been paid, which was comfortable but not abundant. She had been at the same approximate income level for 4 years, not because her skills had not grown. They had grown enormously, but because she was offering those grown skills to the same pool of clients who had always known her. The shift came through a single introduction at a design conference she almost did not attend. A fellow attendee, an acquaintance, a weak tie, connected her with a Lagos-based agency that worked with international clients. The Lagos agency introduced her to a level of the market she had not previously accessed. Within 18 months of that single introduction, Adi's income had tripled. She told me later, "Nothing about my skills changed in those 18 months. What changed was who I was visible to. Your skills are never enough if no one with the right access can see them. Network is not a luxury for the socially ambitious. It is the mechanism through which your value reaches the people who can pay for it at its real level." The shift from isolation to ecosystem, the financial breakthrough most people are waiting for, rarely arrives through individual effort alone. It arrives through connection, a word spoken by the right person in the right room, an introduction that crosses an invisible boundary, an opportunity that circulates through a network you have built access to. Begin building your ecosystem today, not opportunistically, not transactionally, but with genuine curiosity about the people who are doing things differently from what you have always known, and genuine willingness to offer value in return for access to their world. The network begins with the network. Always. Chapter 5. The Fear of Being Seen. Marianne Williamson said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." There is a particular self-sabotage that is almost never discussed in financial circles because it does not look like self-sabotage. It looks like humility. It looks like modesty. It looks, in fact, like a virtue. It is a fear of being seen. The fear of being seen operates quietly, consistently, and with devastating financial consequences in the lives of millions of talented people. It is the force that makes you underprice your services. It is the voice that says, "I don't want to seem arrogant," when you are about to ask for what you are worth. It is the paralysis that prevents you from publishing your work, launching your business, applying for position, or asking for the raise. It is the internal committee that convenes every time you are about to step into a larger version of yourself and votes reliably to stay small. The underground spring. Here's an analogy. Underground springs exist in many places where people are dying of thirst. The water is there, pure, cold, abundant, available, but because it flows underground, neither the spring nor the thirsty people above can find each other. The spring's water goes undrunk. The people's thirst goes unquenched. The tragedy is not scarcity. It is invisibility. Your talent, your knowledge, your unique perspective, your specific capability. These are the spring. The market is the thirsty people. The fear of being seen keeps you underground. Every day that you remain invisible to the people who need what you have to offer, the gap between your potential and your actual income widens. Not because you are getting worse, not because the market is shrinking, but because the mechanism of translation, the willingness to be seen, is not working. This is one of the most directly financially measurable fears a person can hold. You can literally calculate the income gap created by the fear of visibility. Many people's actual earnings are 50, 60, even 70% below what their level of skill and knowledge would command in the open market, purely because of the fear of exposure that genuine market positioning requires. The imposter mechanism. The fear of being seen is almost always accompanied by imposter syndrome, the persistent, convincing, deeply uncomfortable feeling that you are not as capable as people think you are, that you do not truly belong in the position you are in, and that it is only a matter of time before someone important finds out. The psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who first formally described this phenomenon in 1978, found it to be remarkably common, not among people with marginal competence, but specifically among high achievers. The people who experience imposter syndrome most acutely are, paradoxically, the people who are most genuinely capable. The incompetent rarely feel like imposters because they lack the self-awareness to recognize the gap. The highly competent feel like imposters precisely because they understand enough about the domain to see everything they do not yet know. The author and researcher Brené Brown, who spent years studying shame and vulnerability, described the cause of this fear with characteristic clarity. We cannot selectively numb emotions. When we numb the painful emotions, we also numb the positive ones. The same protection mechanism that keeps you safe from the pain of rejection and exposure also keeps you from the joy and abundance of being fully, visibly, unapologetically yourself in marketplace. Emeka's pricing revolution. Emeka was a software developer in Lagos. He was genuinely excellent, the kind of developer whose clients referred him constantly, whose solutions worked the first time, whose understanding of complex systems was unusual and highly valuable. He was also charging approximately a third of his market rate. When I asked him why, he gave me a complicated answer about market norms and client expectations and what felt reasonable. But when we dug deeper, the real answer emerged. He was afraid that if he charged what he was worth, people would laugh, that they would see the number and immediately see through him, would realize that he was not. In fact, the expert his results suggested he was, that charging more would bring more scrutiny, and more scrutiny would expose the inadequacy he was convinced lay beneath the surface. He was terrified of being seen, so he charged less, which kept him safe and broke simultaneously. The shift came through a single client conversation. A new client, mid-project, asked him offhandedly what he would charge to build a larger, more complex version of the system they had discussed. Emeka, for reasons he still cannot fully explain, named his actual worth instead of his fear-based rate. He gave a number that made his heart pound as he said it. The client said, "That seems very reasonable. When can you start?" That moment, the moment when the client's response matched reality rather than his fear, cracked something open. He had been pricing himself for the audience inside his head, but that audience was a fiction. The real market was willing to pay what he was worth. He doubled his rates the following month. He lost 2 clients. He gained 4 new ones. His income increased by 60% in 90 days, not because his skills improved, because his visibility did. The shift from hiding TOs showing up the financial cost of fear of being seen is not abstract. It is denominated in the exact currency you're trying to build. Money. Every underpriced proposal, every deferred opportunity, every project not launched, every application not submitted. These are not just psychological events. They are financial ones. The shift in this chapter is from hiding to showing up, from allowing the fear of exposure to dictate your market position, to deliberately, uncomfortably, and repeatedly choosing to make your genuine value visible. This does not mean manufactured confidence or performance of certainty you do not feel. It means a practical choice, made in specific moments, to name your worth, publish your work, apply for the opportunity, ask for the raise, launch the product. Not because the fear has disappeared, but because you have decided that its cost is too high to keep paying. Oprah Winfrey, who built one of the most remarkable media empires in history from circumstances that gave her no reason to expect it, said, "The biggest adventure you can ever take is to live the life of your dreams." She could have added, "And the smallest adventure, the one with the highest hidden cost, is to live the life your fear permits." Your worth is not determined by your fear's opinion of it. Name it, charge it, show it. The market has been waiting. Chapter 6. The Debt Trap and the Debt Ladder. The man who never has money enough to pay his debts has too much of something else. There is no financial tool in the world more misunderstood than debt. Ask most people about debt, and they will tell you it is bad. Ask most wealthy people about debt, and they will tell you it is a tool, one of the most powerful tools in the financial toolkit, capable of building extraordinary wealth when used correctly and causing extraordinary destruction when used incorrectly. Both answers are right. That is precisely what makes debt so dangerous and so important to understand. The 2 kinds of debt, the distinction that changes everything, is simple to state and surprisingly rarely taught. Destructive debt puts money into experiences or objects that decline in value while charging you interest that compounds against you over time. Credit card debt for consumer purchases. Car loans for depreciating vehicles. Personal loans for lifestyle expenses. Debt used to fund the urgency illusion described in the previous chapter. This kind of debt does not merely cost you the interest. It costs you the opportunity cost of what that money could have built if it had been invested rather than borrowed and spent. Constructive debt uses borrowed money to acquire or build assets that generate returns greater than the cost of borrowing. A mortgage on a property that will appreciate and generate rental income. A business loan that funds operations generating profits well above the interest rate. Student debt for education that credibly and measurably increases earning capacity. In these cases, the debt is not a drain, it is leverage. You are using the lender's money to generate more money than the lender is charging you for the use of it. The wealthy use debt as a ladder. The financially struggling use debt as a trap. What differs is not the instrument, but the understanding of the instrument and, more fundamentally, the mindset that governs its use. The bicycle analogy here is an analogy that makes this distinction viscerally clear. A bicycle is a tool in the hands of someone who understands it. A bicycle can take you anywhere faster than walking at a fraction of the energy cost, across terrain that feet alone would struggle with. In the hands of someone who does not understand the brakes, a bicycle on a downhill slope becomes a catastrophe. The tool is identical. The outcome is determined entirely by the operator's understanding and skill. Debt works exactly the same way. The people who build wealth with debt are not taking bigger risks than the people who destroy themselves with it. They have simply learned where the brakes are. They understand the difference between riding the bicycle toward a destination and coasting downhill without control. This distinction is rarely taught in homes or schools. Most people receive either no financial education at all or a blanket message that debt is dangerous, a message that, while it protects them from the trap, also prevents them from ever learning to use a ladder. Taiwo's transformation. Taiwo was 41 years old and carrying approximately 3.2 million naira in consumer debt. Credit cards, personal loans, a hire purchase agreement on a car that had depreciated to a fraction of what he was still paying for it. He was spending a significant portion of his monthly income on debt service alone, leaving him perpetually unable to build any savings or investments. His financial counselor introduced him to a framework called the debt cascade, a methodical approach to eliminating destructive debt in the most mathematically efficient order, while simultaneously building a minimal emergency fund to prevent new debt from being accumulated when unexpected expenses arose. What changed Taiwo's life was not the debt cascade itself, though it worked. What changed his life was a simultaneous education about the difference between the debt he was eliminating and the debt he might one day use constructively. For the first time, he began to understand that debt was not an identity. It was not evidence of his inadequacy or proof that he was bad with money. It was a set of decisions made without the right information, and it was correctable. He also began to understand that the same principles he was using to eliminate the trap could, in a different configuration, be used to build a ladder. 3 years after beginning his debt elimination, Taiwo secured a small mortgage on an investment property. He used the same discipline he had developed in eliminating bad debt to manage the good debt responsibly. The rental income covered the mortgage payment with a surplus that went directly into savings. "The bank is now working for me," he told me with quiet satisfaction that carried years of hard work in it, not the other way around. The shift. From debt shame to debt mastery, the mental shift in this chapter is from debt shame, the paralyzing emotional weight of financial mistakes, to debt mastery, the clear-eyed, strategic understanding of how borrowed capital can be used to build rather than destroy. This does not mean ignoring the real damage that destructive debt causes. It means addressing it systematically, without the shame that prevents people from looking at their financial situation clearly, while simultaneously developing the understanding that will allow you to eventually use debt as a building tool rather than a burden. The investor Warren Buffett, whose entire career has been built on the intelligent use of other people's capital, described his core philosophy with deceptive simplicity. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. The way to never lose money on debt is to understand, before you borrow, whether money is going onto the trap or onto the ladder. You now know the difference. Use it. Chapter 7, The Learning Compound. Benjamin Franklin said, "An investment in knowledge pays the best interest." _person. Benjamin Franklin, content. In 1986, a young Kenyan runner named Kipchoge Keino, already an Olympic legend, was asked what single habit he attributed most of his extraordinary athletic career. He did not mention talent. He did not mention natural ability. He said, "I never stopped learning. The day I thought I knew everything was the day I would have begun losing." The compound effect of continuous learning is perhaps the most underappreciated wealth-building mechanism available to any person at any income level. It requires no starting capital. It has no minimum investment requirement. It is available in equal measure to the person earning minimum wage, and the person running a multinational corporation. And its returns, accumulated over a lifetime of intentional study, are beyond calculation. The library and the lottery. Here's a thought experiment. You are given a choice between two envelopes. Envelope A contains 10 million naira in cash, delivered today. Envelope B contains a guaranteed return of 10% per year on whatever you earn through your work, generated by a mental model or skill you will learn and apply over the next 12 months. Most people choose envelope A. Almost all wealthy people choose envelope B. This is not because wealthy people are reckless with large sums of money. It is because they understand something about the nature of returns that the get-rich-quick mentality fundamentally misses. Capital without capability is temporary. Capability without capital is the beginning of everything. The history of lottery winners who return to poverty within 5 years is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about envelope A without the mental models to manage it. The history of immigrants who arrive with nothing and build extraordinary wealth within a generation is not a story about extraordinary luck. It is a story about envelope B, the accumulated compound interest of learning applied consistently over time. The philosopher Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's legendary partner at Berkshire Hathaway, described his own approach to learning with characteristic directness. I have nothing to add to the basic point that continuous learning is the most productive investment a human being can make. I have read voraciously my entire life, and I believe it has contributed more to my financial success than any specific investment I have ever made. Munger is a billionaire. He is attributing his wealth, in significant part, to reading. The 5 categories of wealth-building knowledge, not all learning, is equally valuable for financial transformation. There are 5 specific categories of knowledge that consistently generate the highest financial returns. Financial literacy is the foundational knowledge of how money works, how interest compounds, how investment returns are generated, how tax systems work, how financial instruments function, how businesses generate and distribute value. The majority of people reach adulthood with no meaningful instruction in any of these areas and spend decades making expensive mistakes that a few hours of targeted learning would have prevented. Industry depth is the deep, specific knowledge of a particular field that makes you genuinely more valuable than the generalist. The person who knows finance is more valuable than the person who knows nothing about it. The person who knows the specific dynamics, players, history, emerging trends, and technical realities of a particular financial sector is more valuable still. Often many multiples more valuable. Psychological intelligence is the understanding of human behavior, motivation, and decision-making that underlies every negotiation, every sale, every hiring decision, every partnership, and every business relationship. The financially successful person does not merely understand numbers. They understand people, what they want, what they fear, what motivates them, and how to build trust. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his work on human decision-making, demonstrated rigorously what the wisest business people had always known intuitively. People make financial decisions primarily on emotional grounds and justify them rationally afterward. Understanding this is an economic superpower. Communication and persuasion is the ability to make ideas clear, compelling, and actionable. No value is ever exchanged without communication. The most brilliant idea, the most valuable product, the most exceptional service, none of these generate financial return until they are communicated effectively to someone who will pay for them. The highest earning professionals and entrepreneurs are almost universally exceptional communicators. This is not coincidence. Strategic thinking is the capacity to see patterns across time and complexity, to understand how present actions lead to future consequences, how systems interact, how decisions made today create or close options tomorrow. This is the thinking that Buffett applies when he evaluates an investment, that a founder applies when building a business, that a professional applies when navigating a career. It is learnable, it is teachable, and it compounds. Yowanda's 100 pages. Yowanda worked in human resources for a manufacturing company in Ogun State. She was competent at her job, well-liked, and stuck. She had been at the same level for 6 years and could see no clear pathway forward. Her shift was small, almost embarrassingly small. She decided to read 100 pages per week on topics directly related to financial literacy and professional development. Not 100 pages a day, 100 pages a week, less than 20 pages a day. At the pace of a thoughtful reader, 20 minutes a day, she began with a basic book on personal finance, then a book on negotiation, then a book on organizational psychology, then a book on business strategy written for non-specialists. Within 18 months, she had read approximately 70 books. The knowledge she had accumulated had changed, in a measurable way, how she spoke in meetings, how she framed proposals, how she evaluated opportunities, and how she understood her own value in the organization. She received 2 promotions in 3 years. She began consulting independently in her field on weekends. She launched a small coaching service for professionals navigating HR challenges. "I didn't get smarter," she told me. "I got informed. There is a difference, and the financial difference is enormous." The shift from spending on things to investing and understanding the mental shift in this chapter is from viewing books, courses, seminars, and mentorship as expenses, things that cost money, to viewing them as the highest yield investment available. A book that costs 2,000 naira and changes one mental model about money or business or negotiation has a potential return that no financial instrument can match. The question is never whether the learning is worth the cost. The question is whether you are learning the right things and applying them with sufficient intention and consistency. Begin today. 20 pages. One new idea. One applied insight. Compound across a year of deliberate learning. You will look back at who you are today and barely recognize the distance traveled. The library is the most profitable building in the world. Most people walk past it every day. Chapter 8. The Multiplication Mindset. Phil Collins said, "The more you give, the more you get." There's a lake in the Middle East that has fascinated geographers, ecologists, and philosophers for thousands of years. It is called the Dead Sea, and it is, in a literal sense, dead. Almost nothing lives in it. Its water is nearly 10 times salter than the ocean. Fish brought into its waters die within hours. The Dead Sea has a source. The Jordan River flows into it continuously, carrying fresh water and nutrients. But the Dead Sea has no outlet. Everything that flows and stays in. And over millennia, the accumulation without outflow has created a body of water hostile to almost all life. 40 miles north of the Dead Sea, fed by the same Jordan River, sits the Sea of Galilee. It receives the same water from the same source. But the Sea of Galilee has outlets. It feeds rivers and channels that carry its water outward into surrounding land. And the Sea of Galilee teems with life. It has been one of the most productive fishing grounds in the region for thousands of years. Entire communities have flourished on its shores. Same source, same input, entirely different outcome. The difference is not in what comes in, it is in whether anything goes out. The hoarding paradox. The instinctive response to financial scarcity and to the fear of it is hoarding. Clutch tighter, share less, keep everything in, guard against outflow. This response is biologically natural. It is a survival response to perceived resource scarcity. But it is economically counterproductive in a world where wealth is created not by the accumulation of static resources, but by the circulation of dynamic value. Here is why wealth, in the modern world, is not a fixed pile of gold in a vault. It is a flow, a continuous movement of value between people, organizations, and systems. The people who become wealthy are not those who intercept the most of this flow and store it. They are those who position themselves in the path of the flow and facilitate its movement in ways that generate consistent returns. The restaurant owner does not get rich by cooking one meal and keeping it. They get rich by cooking thousands of meals and giving each one away in exchange for money, which is then reinvested in cooking more meals. The author does not build wealth by writing one book and locking it in a drawer. They build it by releasing it, giving it to the world, and allowing the world's response to generate returns. Giving, the deliberate, strategic release of value into the world, is not the opposite of wealth building. It is one of its primary mechanisms. Alyatun's generosity experiment. Alyatun was a financial analyst who had read about the concept of generosity as a wealth principle with significant skepticism. He was a data-driven person. The idea that giving away money or value could make him richer struck him, frankly, as the kind of wishful thinking that kept poor people poor. He decided to test it empirically. For 1 year, he committed to giving away 10% of his time, approximately 4 hours per week, to mentoring junior analysts in his field. without charging for it, without expecting anything in return. He tracked his career trajectory carefully before and after. In the year of the experiment, he received 2 unsolicited job offers from organizations whose decision-makers had encountered his mentoring work through the people he had helped. He was invited to speak at 2 industry conferences, again, because people he had helped had recommended him. His professional network grew faster in that year than in the previous 3 years combined. The giving had not cost him time. It had generated visibility, reputation, and connection. The 3 assets that translate most directly into income in a knowledge economy. The generosity was not altruistic, he told me, with the blunt honesty of a data person. It was strategic. I just did not know it was strategic when I started. I thought I was being nice. It turned out I was also being financially intelligent. The shift. From scarcity giving to abundant circulation. The mental shift in this chapter is from the Dead Sea model, taking in, holding tight, protecting against outflow, to the Sea of Galilee model, receiving generously and releasing generously, trusting that the circulation itself is the mechanism of continued abundance. This does not mean giving recklessly or without discernment. It means understanding that the relationship between giving and receiving is not the zero-sum transaction that the scarcity mind assumes. In a world of flow rather than fixed piles, what you put into circulation returns to you, often amplified, often from unexpected directions, always with a compound dimension that pure hoarding can never match. The investor and philanthropist John D. Rockefeller, who gave away a significant portion of what was, in his time, the largest personal fortune ever accumulated, described his philosophy with simplicity that still resonates. I never would have been able to tithe the first $1 million I ever made if I had not tithed my first salary, which was $1.50 per week. He was describing the habit of generosity built at a scale so small it seems insignificant, and the compound effect of that habit across a lifetime. Flow beats hoarding. Always has. Always will. Chapter 9, The Patience Tax. Warren Buffett said, "The stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient." In 1937, a young man walked into a Chicago recording studio and recorded a series of songs that would sell virtually nothing during his lifetime. He was paid a small session fee, which was the entirety of his financial reward for recordings that, 60 years later, would sell for astronomical sums at auction and influence virtually every important musician of the 20th century. His name was Robert Johnson. He is credited by musicians from Eric Clapton to Keith Richards as one of the foundational architects of the blues and, through it, of rock and roll. He died in 1938 at approximately 27 years old, having received essentially no financial reward for work of extraordinary cultural and commercial value. Robert Johnson is an extreme example, a tragic one, given his early death, of what might be called the patience problem. The gap between when value is created and when value is recognized and financially rewarded. This gap exists everywhere in the creation of wealth. Understanding it and developing the psychological tools to navigate it is one of the most important skills a wealth builder can develop. The bamboo tree principal Chinese mozo bamboo is one of the most remarkable plants in the world. When a mozo bamboo seed is planted, nothing visible happens for the first 4 years. You water it, you fertilize it, you tend it, and nothing appears above the ground. For 4 years. In the 5th year, the bamboo grows 90 feet in 6 weeks. The question is, was the bamboo growing during those first 4 years, or did it suddenly start growing in year 5? The answer, of course, is that it was growing the entire time, building a root system so extensive and so deep that when it finally broke through the surface, nothing could stop it. The growth was happening underground, invisible and unacknowledged, for years before it became visible. Most genuine wealth works exactly like mozo bamboo. The years of learning, saving, investing, skill building, and relationship nurturing that precede the visible financial breakthrough are not wasted years. They are the root system. Every overnight success story that you hear, if you investigate honestly, reveals the same structure. Years of invisible, unrecognized work preceding the moment the world suddenly pays attention. The writer Malcolm Gladwell popularized the observation, drawing on research by Anders Ericsson, that mastery in any complex domain typically requires approximately 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. This is not a rigid scientific law, but a useful approximation of a consistent reality. The visible payoff is almost always preceded by a long period of invisible investment. People who quit before the bamboo breaks the surface never know how close they were. The mathematics of impatience. Impatience has a specific, calculable financial cost. It is called opportunity cost, and is arguably the largest single wealth destruction force available to the ordinary person. Here is an example. An investor who starts saving and investing 50,000 naira per month at age 25 and continues until age 65, 40 years, will, at a modest 10% annual return, accumulate approximately 265 million naira. An investor who waits until age 35 to begin, just 10 years later, and invests the same amount with the same return for 30 years will accumulate approximately 98 million naira. The 10-year delay, driven by the impatience that says, "I'll start when I have more," or the urgency illusion that consumes the money in the present, costs 167 million naira. Not a fee, not a penalty, just the simple mathematics of time and compound interest working against the person who did not start. This is the patience tax. The amount you pay for choosing the present over future, and for failing to understand that patience is not passive waiting but the active, continuous investment of resources and effort across the full timeline that genuine wealth creation requires. Beezy's decade. Beezy started a small catering business at age 28 with a borrowed pot and 15,000 naira supplies. For the first 3 years, she barely broke even. For the next 2, she made a modest profit that covered her expenses and almost nothing more. In years 6 and 7, she began landing corporate contracts. In year 8, she expanded. In year 9, she hired 8 people and moved to a commercial kitchen. In year 10, she was invited to cater a government event that introduced her to the contacts who would, in the following year, generate more revenue than her first 8 years combined. She did not quit in year 3 when it barely paid. She did not quit in year 5 when it was slow. She did not quit during the long invisible period when the root system was forming underground. "People see the catering company I have now," she told me, "and they say, 'You're so lucky it worked out.' They were not there for the 9 years when I did not know if it would work. But those 9 years were not wasted. Those 9 years with the company. I was just building it underground." The shift from microwave to slow cooker. The mental shift in this chapter is from microwave thinking, instant results or I stop, to slow cooker thinking. The understanding that the most nourishing, the most substantial, and the most lasting financial rewards come to those who are willing to apply heat consistently over time without demanding that the food be ready before it is cooked. This is not an argument for patience in the face of the wrong strategy. If the strategy is wrong, change the strategy. But if the strategy is sound, if the fundamentals are in place, if the work is being done, if the investment is being made, then the greatest threat to the outcome is not a flawed plan. It is an impatient mind. The root system is forming. Let it. Chapter 10. The Multiple Streams Mandate. Warren Buffett said, "Never depend on a single income. Make investments to create a second source." On a Tuesday morning in 2008, thousands of people across the United States went to work as they always had. By Friday, they had no jobs. The financial crisis of 2008 did not give warnings. It did not ask permission. It arrived in the space of a few months. It eliminated not just incomes, but entire industries, and left people who followed every conventional rule of financial responsibility suddenly devastated by the realization that a single income structure has no resilience. The lesson of 2008 was not that markets are unreliable. They always have been. The lesson was that income structures built on a single pillar collapse when that pillar is removed. This lesson is available in smaller scale around us every day. The employee who is retrenched, the freelancer whose biggest client stops working, the business owner whose single revenue stream dries up when a competitor enters the market, the farmer whose single crop fails in a bad season. One source of income, regardless of how reliable it seems today, is structurally fragile. The solution is not panic or recklessness. It is architecture. The rope and the thread here is an analogy. A thread can hold perhaps half a kilogram before it snaps. A rope made of 100 threads twisted together can hold far more than 100 times half a kilogram. It can hold hundreds of kilograms. because the structure itself, the intertwining, creates a strength greater than the sum of the individual components. A single income is a thread. Multiple income streams twisted together are a rope. The goal of multiple income streams is not primarily higher income, though that is a frequent and welcome consequence. The primary goal is resilience, the structural ability to absorb the loss of any single income stream without catastrophic disruption to your financial life. The 5 income channels. There are 5 primary channels through which income can flow into a life, and financially sophisticated people typically develop at least 3 of them simultaneously. Employment or core professional income provides a foundation, the primary active income that funds daily life, and, crucially, provides a capital to build everything else. This should never be treated as a destination, but as an enabling platform. Side professional services or freelancing leverages the skills of your primary profession in parallel contexts: consulting, coaching, training, advising. This is often the easiest second stream to develop because it draws on existing capability without requiring entirely new skills. Intellectual property income comes from creating once and receiving returns repeatedly. Books, online courses, templates, guides, digital tools, recorded training programs. In the digital age, the infrastructure required to create and sell intellectual property is available to almost anyone with skill and a laptop. Investment returns, the dividend, interest, and capital appreciation income from financial assets, grow slowly at first and then, through compound growth, can become substantial. The key is starting early and contributing consistently, even at small amounts. Asset income, rental income from property, income from a business you own but do not personally operate, licensing income from any asset you own that others pay to use, represents the fullest expression of the investor mind described in Chapter 2, Ngozi's architecture. Ngozi was a secondary school teacher, a genuinely excellent one, passionate about her subject and beloved by her students. She was also, at 31, acutely aware that her teacher's salary, while adequate, provided no buffer against any financial emergency and no pathway toward a life she imagined for her future. She began with what she knew. She created a set of study guides for the subject she taught and began selling them through a simple online storefront. The first month, she made 12,000 naira, not life-changing, but a second thread. Then she began tutoring students privately on weekends, a service she had always avoided because she felt her time was too precious. She changed her mind. Her time was precisely what she was investing. Within a year, the private tutoring was generating as much as her teaching salary. Then she took some of her tutoring income and opened a small savings investment account. Small, consistent, the bamboo root system beginning underground. By 35, Ngozi had 4 income streams: her teacher's salary, her tutoring practice, her digital study guides, and the beginning, still small, of an investment portfolio. No single stream was sufficient alone. Together, they had transformed her from financially vulnerable to financially resilient. "I didn't replace my teaching salary," she told me. "I surrounded it. Now, if anything happens to any one of them, the others hold me up. That feeling of being held up is worth more than the extra money itself." The shift from single pillar to portfolio architecture. The mental shift in this chapter is from the single pillar income structure, one job, one source, one point of failure, to the portfolio architecture, the deliberate, patient construction of multiple complementary income streams that collectively create resilience, growth, and the structural capacity to survive and thrive regardless of what happens to any single component. You do not build all 5 channels at once. You begin with the most natural first extension of what you already do, establish it, then build the next. One thread at a time, but always with the rope as the goal. The question to carry from this chapter: what is the second thread I can begin spinning today? Chapter 11, The Environment of Excellence. Clement Stone said, "You are a product of your environment, so choose the environment that will best develop you toward your objective." In the late 19th century, a young man named Thomas Edison ran what was arguably the world's first industrial research laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. He gathered around him a team of remarkable people. not just engineers and scientists, but thinkers from diverse disciplines who argued, challenged, collaborated, and competed with each other in an environment Edison deliberately designed for creative output. The results were extraordinary. The phonograph, the incandescent light bulb, the motion picture camera, and hundreds of other inventions, many of which transformed the global economy, emerged from that environment. Edison's genius was real, but what multiplied it beyond any single person's capacity was the environment he built and the people he filled it with. The famous inventor described his philosophy of environment this way: genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. But what he demonstrated through the Menlo Park Laboratory was something equally important. Perspiration in the right environment produces results that perspiration in isolation never could. The soil and the seed revisited. Earlier in this book, we use the image of a seed and soil to describe the relationship between a person and their network. Here we return to a more specific focus. Not just who you know, but the total environment you live in, the physical spaces, the media you consume, the conversations you have, the standards you are surrounded by, and the ambient expectations you absorb daily. The soil of your environment is not just your social circle. It is your phone's home screen. It is what you listen to during your commute. It is the conversations at your family table. It is the television you watch in the evening. It is the content that fills your mental landscape during the hours between waking and sleeping. All of this is soil, and it is either growing you toward the wealth you want to build or growing you away from it. The three environmental levers. There are three primary levers through which environment shapes financial outcomes. The standards lever. Every environment has implicit standards, unstated norms about what level of achievement, ambition, and financial aspiration is normal and acceptable. In an environment where financial mediocrity is the norm, ambition feels like arrogance. In an environment where excellence is a norm, mediocrity feels like waste. You cannot fully escape the gravitational pull of the standards surrounding you, but you can choose to change your environment. The information lever. The information you consume regularly shapes what possibilities you can imagine. A person who consumes entertainment exclusively cannot easily think the thoughts of an investor. A person who reads broadly about business, finance, psychology, and personal development has access to mental models that people who do not read about these things simply do not have. The content you allow into your mind is not passive. It is formative. The conversation lever. The conversations you have and hear regularly shape your sense of what is possible and normal. Conversations about financial hardship, victimhood, and the impossibility of change reinforce the poverty script. Conversations about strategy, opportunity, learning, and growth reinforce the wealth mindset. You cannot entirely control what conversations happen around you, but you can make deliberate choices about which ones you engage with and which ones you step away from. Lonra's deliberate redesign. Lonra was an entrepreneur who had been trying to grow his logistics business for 3 years with minimal success. He was working hard, genuinely hard, but the business was stuck at a level of revenue that covered his costs and not much more. A mentor asked him a question that changed everything. Tell me about the last 5 business conversations you had and who you had them with. Lonra described 5 conversations with people at roughly the same level. People who were also stuck, also struggling, also reinforcing for each other the belief that growth beyond a certain point was very difficult in their market. His mentor said, "Your environment is showing you its ceiling. Find an environment that doesn't have that ceiling." Lonra joined a business growth organization. He attended its monthly meetings, where he encountered entrepreneurs who were generating 10, 20, 50 times his current revenue. He found rapidly that his ambient sense of what was achievable changed simply through exposure to people for whom his ceiling was a level they had passed years ago. Within 18 months, his business had doubled, not because he had learned a secret strategy, though he had learned many new approaches, but because the environment had recalibrated his internal standard of normal. His poverty ceiling had been replaced by other people's floor. "I was not less capable before," he said. "I was just surrounded by the wrong definition of possible." The shift from default environment to designed environment. The mental shift in this chapter is from accepting the environment you happen to inhabit to deliberately designing the environment that will produce the person you intend to become. This is not about abandoning your community or rejecting your roots. It is about supplementing your default environment with intentional exposure to the standards information, and conversations that align with your financial aspirations. Read what wealthy, thoughtful people read. Have conversations that expand your sense of what is possible. Spend time regularly in physical and social spaces where the ambient standard of achievement is ahead of where you currently are. Your environment is either a greenhouse or a wilderness. Design a greenhouse. Chapter 12. The Wealth Declaration. Mark Twain said, "The secret of getting ahead is getting started." We have traveled far in these chapters. We have examined the poverty script running in your mind since childhood. We have looked honestly at the employee mind and the investor mind. We have dissected the urgency illusion that turns today's desires into tomorrow's debts. We have explored the power of network, the cost of hiding, the mathematics of patience, the leverage of learning, the architecture of multiple streams, and the formative power of environment. All of this is knowledge. Knowledge is necessary. Knowledge is not sufficient. There is a moment, specific, datable, often preceded by a long period of preparation and followed by years of work, that separates people who talk about financial transformation and people who achieve it. That moment is the decision, not a wish, not a hope, not an intention. A decision, the kind that is made with the whole self, that cuts off the possibility of the alternative, that commits the will in a direction that cannot be easily undone. The word decide comes from the Latin decidere, which means to cut off. To decide is to cut off other options, to choose this path, and, in choosing it, to make the other paths no longer available to part of you that would otherwise keep revisiting them. Most people never truly decide. They semi-decide. They sort of decide. They decide provisionally, with one foot still in the old identity, the old script, the old way of relating to money, and provisional decisions produce provisional results. The transformation never fully arrives because the commitment was never fully made. The burning ship revisited in the opening chapter. We use a story about burning ships, the audacious act of eliminating the option to retreat. We return to it here not as a call to recklessness, but as an image of psychological commitment. You do not need to burn your financial safety nets. In fact, building them is precisely the point of this book. What you do need to burn is the internal safety net of the old identity, the comfortable belief that who you have been financially is who you will always be, that the script is reality, that the ceiling is fixed. That is the ship to burn. The story that says, I am this kind of person, not that kind. I can achieve this level, not that one. This is what money is for people like me. When you burn that ship, you do not become reckless. You become committed. And committed people, in my observation, achieve things that uncommitted people can look at for years and never reach. Not because the committed people are more capable, but because they have stopped providing themselves with the option of not getting there. The anatomy of a true decision, a true financial decision, has three components that distinguish it from a more common provisional intention. The first is clarity of purpose. Not, I want to be better with money, but a specific, measurable, time-bounded articulation of where you intend to go. Not, I want to build wealth, but I will build an emergency fund of 6 months' expenses within 12 months. I will eliminate all consumer debt within 3 years, and I will have 3 income streams established within 5 years. Specificity is the difference between a wish and a plan. The second is committed action. The decision is evidenced not by what you say, but by what you do in the next 24 hours. The decision to change your financial life must be followed immediately by at least one concrete action, however small, that begins a new trajectory. Open the investment account. Write down the debt cascade. Make the first tutoring appointment. Send the first proposal. The first action anchors a decision in reality. The third is accountability structure. A true decision is held in place not merely by willpower, which research consistently shows is a finite and unreliable resource, but by environmental structures and relationships that make the decision visible, accountable, and socially real. A mentor who knows your goal. A group of peers who share the journey. A written commitment reviewed regularly. These are not weakness. They are architecture. The letter to your future self. Here is the exercise with which this book ends, and with which your financial transformation truly begins. Write a letter to the version of yourself that will exist 5 years from today. The version that has made the decision, done the work, and arrived somewhere significantly different from where you are now. Describe that person. What do they know? What do they have? How do they feel about money? What do they do with their time and their resources? What does their financial life look like? And more importantly, what does it enable? The freedom, the impact, the experiences, the generosity, the security that your current financial life does not. Write it in detail. Write it as if it is already true, because the commitment you make today is the cause of which that future self is the effect. Then fold the letter and put it somewhere you will find it again. The decision made today is the gift you give to the person you are writing the letter to. They have been waiting for it. They have always been waiting for it. Today is the day. The final shift from knowing to being. 12 chapters, 12 mental shifts, each one a door, but no door opens itself. The philosopher and psychologist William James, who founded American psychology and spent his career studying the relationship between thought and action, said it with perfect economy. Act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. You are not broken. You were never broken. You are operating with incomplete information, running inherited scripts, inhabiting environments that confirmed old possibilities and blocked new ones, and managing the perfectly human fear of becoming someone the people around you might not recognize. That is over now. You have the information. You have seen the scripts. You know what the environment needs to look like. And you understand at a level that can no longer be conveniently ignored that the wealth you want is not waiting for circumstances to align. It is waiting for you to decide. The poverty script ends today. The investor mind begins today. The urgency illusion is seen for what it is. The networks are ready to be built. The visibility is ready to be claimed. The multiple streams are ready to be woven. The environment is ready to be designed. All that remains is a decision. Make it now. Make it whole. Make it the beginning of everything. You were never going to stay this version of yourself forever. You were always going to grow. The only question was when you decide to start. The answer is today. Conclusion, the compound life. We began with a lake that was dying, the Dead Sea, taking in without releasing, accumulating without circulating, until even the water within became hostile to life. We end with the image of a river in full flow, receiving, moving, giving, building, carving new channels through rock and time with nothing more than the consistent application of its own nature. That is what a financially transformed life looks like. Not a vault. A river. The 12 mental shifts in this book are not 12 separate projects. They are 12 facets of a single transformation. The shift from a scarcity identity to an abundance architecture, from a poverty script to a chosen narrative, from the employee mind to the investor mind, from the urgency of the present moment to the patience of compound time. You will not implement all 12 simultaneously. You will begin with one, the one that landed hardest. The chapter you underlined most heavily, the shift that made something ache with recognition in your chest. Begin there. Implement one shift until it is no longer a practice, but a default, then return for the next. The compound effect is not merely a financial phenomenon. It is a human one. Every new mental model built compounds with the models that preceded it. Every habit established creates the neural infrastructure for the next. Every decision honored builds the decision-making capacity to honor harder ones. You are not starting over. You are starting forward, from exactly where you are, with exactly what you have, toward a version of your financial life that is not merely different in amount, but different in kind. Different in what it says about who you are and what you believe about yourself and your place in the economy of human exchange. The last word of this book belongs to the man who understood better than almost anyone alive what it means to build extraordinary wealth from an extraordinary mind. Warren Buffett, when asked what single piece of financial advice he would give to a young person starting out, said, "The most important investment you can make is in yourself, not in the stock market, not in real estate, not in any financial instrument. In yourself. That investment is what these 12 chapters have been about. It is what every decision you make tomorrow will be about, and it is of all the investment available to any human being, the only one with unlimited upside and a minimum possible return of life lived fully and freely in the direction of your own choosing. Invest well. The river is yours.